Hi, Erin.
Hi, Tracy. How are you?
How are you? I can't believe nobody's on.
I'm always like,
I know, and I'm like, all right, people come on about 7, but usually, they're on, and I'm like, oh no, it's like 2 minutes to 7, and now it's 7. I'm surprised.
yeah.
How was your vacation?
Oh, it was so nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, it was lots of good family time. Did you have
Yeah,
a good
exactly.
holiday?
Yeah, pretty much. It was quiet, but good.
Good.
Yeah, it was a
Good.
good time. Oh,
Good.
there's somebody we
Hey,
know. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
hi. All right. Let's see, I'm trying to get the code thing in. There's Doug.
I know. I just gotta grab my paper. Hold on.
Participants, invite link. Hang on for a sec. Where's that thing? Meeting, full screen.
Okay.
I heard from Kathy, and she said that she can't. Can everybody hear me? Yeah,
Somewhat.
somewhat. You can't hear me to bump up somehow? Ready to yell? How about now, Trace?
Yeah, it's better. It was just all fuzzy.
Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear. Fuzzy Wuzzy
Yes.
had. Never mind.
Yep, no hair.
I
Sorry.
talked to Kathy, and she's sick. And I guess we'll give it another minute or two for Joy. Have you talked to Tracy? Have you talked to Annie?
I haven't. Annie, no.
You haven't?
It's what you know.
Let me text them both.
Okay.
I'm going in and out. Let me.
It could even be me.
Marie, Joy.
No, you're cutting out.
Hey, we're logged into the meeting.
All right,
Please join us.
I trust that. It's you.
Okay. Let's see here. And we got another minute or two. Actually, you know what? I'll call Joy real quick. Call Joy Schilling.
In Haverhill, everyone's 15 minutes to everything. So.
All right, that's voicemail. Call Anne-Marie Gallivan. All right, no answer. So what do you call it? Let's see, we're at 7:03. There's three of us have 7, which isn't a whole lot, but it is what it is. Tonight we have a special guest with us, and Doug, I appreciate you getting in on us as well, and Tracy as far as being here. I think what we'll do is we'll go over the schedule, even though we have low numbers, because we do have a guest tonight. And I think what she's going to talk to us about is very important given the strategic direction that we're going. Even having a recorded entry of this so that they can watch it, we can get feedback in a month, I think, has value. Without further ado, I will start tonight's meeting of the Albion Cultural Exchange Committee Skeleton Crew. And as long as there are no objections, I'm going to just go straight to topic number 4, which is funding, and then and that includes our guest tonight. And then after we're done with that, she'll click off, and we'll go back to the agenda in the regular order. Is everybody okay with that? Doug, yep. I see him. You with me?
Yes. Yep. Okay. Now, do we have enough people to have the meeting? I mean, do we have to have a minimum number of people?
Yeah, we can have the meeting to just have the important part of tonight's meeting is the guests. We're not doing any votes on anything. And so it's really informational. So while we may not technically have a quorum for voting, we will have a recorded record of our guest tonight. Everybody's having a tough signal issue, huh? Cool. You good with that? All right, good.
Yep, good.
So item number 4 on our list here is the Cultural Facilities Fund of the Mass Cultural Council. And what I have to communicate to the community and to our group here is that the Cultural Facilities Fund has opened up for this year. And that is the facilities fund, which would give us various things to do for our operational aspects of our facility. As you recall, we've applied to this fund in the past and been rejected because we don't have a 501c3 or more than 50,000 square feet, which are the 2 requirements to get inside of this fund. We've been working with the gentleman at the state, Jay Paget, for the last 8 years. And I called him as we got to this point where we're looking at putting in our 501c3 so that we can secure future funding, and talk to him about, what that looks like and how to get more money from the state. And what he suggested, along with some other people that I've sought guidance on, was to build up a portfolio of reference sites. And in our conversation, one of the reference sites that was mentioned in the first one that's been explored is Creative Haverhill. And so we have Erin here from Creative Haverhill tonight. And Tracy and I have gone up to the actual facility and had a little bit of a preview. So we know a little bit about what she's going to had some conversations, or just private conversations, where we talked about, some of the real communication things that I think are important for our committee members to know as we forward on this, really like the whys and what are her experiences. Her experiences are similar and yet wildly different than ours, but wildly the same. So without, trying to give her talk for her, I'd like to introduce Erin Padilla from Creative Haverhill. Just talk to us a little bit about your project, your 501c3, and how you think we could benefit from that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and it's nice to see you both again, and to meet you, Doug. Happy to share my background, our organization's background, and just as a caveat, my entire background is nonprofit work. I've been in nonprofits for just short of 10 years, so I am very biased to the nonprofit world. So if I'm speaking positively about it, it's because it's the world I understand. It doesn't mean it's perfect. So I just wanted to share that. But I do have a lot of positive things to say about being a nonprofit with a similar project. And just so you kind of understand our project and a bit of the similarities and differences, we, Creative Haverhill, a 501c3 nonprofit, have been managing a capital campaign to develop a school in Haverhill into a community art center. It will be the Cogswell Art Space. We started the project right around the time you guys did in 2014 with the ideas about it, and have been working towards raising funds to renovate the space and then open it since then. So a little different in that we are trying to raise all the funds first, then renovate, then open, whereas you guys have been renovating, opening, and phasing and things like that. So it's been really interesting and exciting to kind of hear about your process. And once it's open, it will be 3-story or 2 stories with a basement, and that will include gallery space, education rooms for workshops and classes for all ages, rooms for after school clubs and vacation camps for youth. It'll include individual artist studio spaces for artists to rent that are under market rate and affordable, and also a maker space with ceramics, printmaking, and a wood shop, and a large gallery space. And the whole concept around this space is to develop a sustainable community art center that's both sustainable for our organization as a nonprofit, but is also sustainable for the creative community, so they have a safe long-term space for their purposes. So everything that we've been doing is really founded in what is the most sustainable long-term feasible option for creative community arts and our nonprofit in Haverhill. It's a bit bigger than your guys' space. It's a little over 21,000 square feet. So again, similarities and differences. We have a little more to work with, but it's just, we were laughing so much about how much we've just crossed paths in so many different ways. So I won't get into all that. But let's see. So in speaking about kind of our nonprofit side and how we've approached everything, we purchased the building from the city in 2018. A part of our sustainability structure is that we own the facility so that we aren't bogged down by rent, our artists aren't bogged down by rent, things like that, and that we can have a constant cycle of what our costs are and such, instead of having things like rent and utilities and all that change as much as it does when you're renting a space. So we purchased the building from the city in 2019, and we are a private entity that owns the facility. And let's see, I have some notes so that I would stay organized in what I'm sharing. So I'm just referencing those. So a big element to the sustainable structure for our Cogswell and our organization is making sure we have a diversified revenue stream. And that's something that a nonprofit really supports really well. A lot of people have a misunderstanding about nonprofits, that they don't make a profit. And they do actually, right? Nonprofits bring in revenue, and the difference is that revenue goes back into their programs. And so the best nonprofits I've seen, the most successful ones I've seen, operate like a for-profit. They just allocate their funds differently. And that difference just goes back into their programs. And so it's totally okay to bring in revenue from a variety of different streams, because that is what allows you to do your work and to bring programs to the community and such. And that diversified revenue stream is really key, because we can bring in revenue from grants, from donations, from programs and rentals, from earmarks, from family foundations, from memberships, and everything is tax deductible. So it's a huge motivator both for individuals, but also for larger family foundations. And it puts you in the stream of all the grants that we've gotten, and you guys would absolutely be applicable for in the state. I always say I feel so lucky to be a nonprofit in the arts in Massachusetts, because Mass Cultural Council is incredible. There's so many opportunities for funding for the arts, especially for nonprofits. So not to say that we have a ton of funds. I mean, we've been working 8 years to get this facility open. It is still really hard, but it's incredible the support we have from the state and from organizations like Mass Cultural Council. So being a 501c3 opens up not just programs and rentals and general revenue you would be doing if you're a for-profit anyways, but all of these other streams that are unique to being a nonprofit because of the tax deductible element. So that's huge. And our organization, we've received 3 grants from Mass Cultural Council for our campaign that included a feasibility study initially, it included funds that helped us do initial environmental abatement. And then it was also the Cultural Facilities Fund, which will be allocated towards our construction. And that is a matching grant. And when we did our round, it was $200,000, so that's $400,000 going towards our capital campaign. So that was that. It wouldn't happen without Mass Cultural Council and those grants. We also received funding from Mass Development. We received state earmarks. We received funds from the city, family foundations, community donations and fundraisers, and also historic tax credits. I don't know if I mentioned this. You don't have to be a nonprofit to receive historic tax credits, Chris. I feel like maybe I alluded to that, and that's actually not true. It can.
I need to get into the whole tax credit thing. Like, I mean, I sort of took it all in as a big bulk, and I need to investigate now.
Yeah, and we're more than happy to help with that process, because it is a really arduous one and it's confusing. And my board director, she is kind of an expert on it now, because she's been spending 8 years trying to figure it out. And we work with Architectural Heritage Foundation to also sort out the tax credit side of things. State tax credits are a little bit easier than federal historic tax credits. we're applicable to both. But it's a little bit of a confusing process, but that's through the federal and state historic tax credits combined, we're getting just short of $1 million if we can monetize it properly. So that's added some complications to our story in that it requires that we can't phase the project like you guys have done, which has been the main reason why we haven't phased it. But I'm not going to waste a lot of time on that process because I could probably talk your ear off about that. But if you do have questions, I can answer them. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought I said that. Someone said.
No, sorry.
No. Another element that I find is really helpful as a nonprofit is that it's a mission-driven entity, and it's a private mission-driven entity. And what that means is that you, as board of directors, or whatever that structure might look like for you guys, board of directors develops the mission and the values, and everything you do gets filtered through that. So it protects the organization. It gives meaning and balance to why you're doing what you do. It helps communicate your story really well. Chris gets that with his marketing background. Story and communicating your story is so key. So it really organizes that story, and it clarifies so much with a community. When you say, hey, we would so love to be doing this and to say yes to this rental that you want to do, but this is our mission and these are values. It just doesn't quite fit into that. So the board, is not going to let us do that. It's a really helpful structure. And the way that we have structured that, the organizations I've been with have structured their organizational structure is board of directors is kind of up here, and they focus on long-term goals, strategies, strategic plans, all of that. They have got the long-term vision, and they manage the executive director. The executive director then executes kind of the day-to-day and the long-term goals and strategies and reports back to the board. And then the executive director manages the staff and the volunteers. And that has worked really well because board to staff relationship can get a little confusing. So it's really nice to kind of have this group up here that's looking at long-term goals, while we've got this group down here that's on the day-to-day and get how things are running on the day-to-day. And then you've got your ED in between who's managing the two, and that's literally their job, right? So you can fit things like that into a job description really clearly. And that's just another really important piece about sustainability that I've seen, especially in nonprofit world, is that having a paid staff to run your organization. We've had a number of and I'm not from Haverhill, so my history here is short, but I've learned a lot about the history of organizations in this community. There have been a number of organizations that have tried to be entirely volunteer run, and they were really phenomenal and wonderful. There was an art center in downtown Haverhill with artist studios and everything years and years ago, and it was entirely volunteer run. So great while it happened, but volunteer run organizations generally don't last as long as organizations that have that operational structure and a paid staff, because there's not enough structure and system to allow for longevity. Because when a volunteer is done, that person might be done, right? And there's no planning for how do we onboard someone to take this person's role? How do we add to our volunteers? I mean, it just there's some level of common sense there, and that if you pay people to do the job, they're going to do the job because they're getting paid to do the job. There's that element of it, but there's also that system that is really, really helpful, especially when you want your organization to outgrow and outlive the founders. And the best way to do that is to create a system that allows for that. And you do that by having staff who train and grow and and work through your organization. So I'm an advocate for that, just because I've seen volunteer run organizations be amazing and not be able to last as long as I think that they could if they were able to grow out of that. And another
I
beautiful
think
thing
that's
about
a real great way to put it.
what?
I think that's a great way to put it, to grow and outlive the founders, because in a way that's to grow and outlive the founders, I think is a great way to put it. The longevity play. And I think that's something that that I like the way you articulated that. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing.
It's not. It's actually, that's a success story, is like, if an organization can grow and outlive their founders, that's amazing. And how cool, right? You want a nonprofit to do that. And another thing that helps support that is when you develop a nonprofit, you develop bylaws, and in those bylaws you have things like you can put in term limits, you can put in the president to vice president structure change, you can put in all these things that allow for those systems to happen naturally and to really keep your organization vivacious as it grows with the community, because communities continuously change and develop. You want to develop with them. So the requirement of bylaws is actually really helpful. They're there for a reason. So that's great. And then also, as a nonprofit, you're a private entity. Private versus public is completely different wheelhouse. Especially, I've heard a little bit about, you guys are connected as a city, to the city. And so we get some questioning of like, oh, are my taxes paying for that? And we no, they're not. Isn't that great? Because we're not even connected to the city. You might think we're connected to the city. We're not connected to the city, And so I find that really helpful, because there can be a lot of opinions about just the political elements of city culture, or the constant shifting of elected officials and things like that. It just can put your organization a little bit at risk, because you're attached to something that you as the organization don't have as much control over. But that's a preference thing. I see positives in being connected to the city as well. So but I've never been in an organization that's connected to the city in the way yours is. So I'm not an expert on that. And then I think those are my main structural points. I think Chris had kind of sent me, here are some things we're talking about. So if you want to hit, these categories, that's what I came up with for those categories. But I'd love to answer questions, or Chris, if I didn't hit on something you're hoping I hit on, tell me and I'll start talking.
No, I think that's good for sure. And, I think the key points to what you're saying, I'm hearing are like independent for longevity's sake and for planning and succession, outlive your founders, multiple lines of revenue, and just the benefits that come with the ability to have an executive director, right? So having an executive director, multiple lines of revenue, and a longevity plan are the things that make this stuff successful over time. Is that pretty much right there?
Yeah, that's definitely hitting what I was hoping it would hit. And just to kind of help with that, it comes from, I worked for a nonprofit in Oregon that I started in year 4 with them. They're now in year, I think, 14. 12. And so I've been able to see how this very new arts nonprofit organization has operated over the years. I'm still very close to the staff there. And so it's coming from the history of their organization as well. And then also the history of what we're doing in Haverhill. But just to kind of add that I've really seen it be successful in a 14-year, newer nonprofit as they've developed through the years. And that's where a lot of this is coming from. 12-year. Keep saying 14. 12. Sorry.
Listen. Oh,
I keep saying
Aaron,
years, and we're about to be next. So,
thank you very much for the presentation. We have a lot to think about for our committee, and part of that is, we need to be informed. about our options. And I think, what you presented today was, a lot of good information and gives us a lot to think about. It's a big step for us to go from a volunteer to a nonprofit when you now start to think about the structure that needs to be in place to support that. And, we're not, it's something that we need to think about and plan for. And and this information was for me was very helpful. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Tracy, any questions? You were on our visit, Trace, so you probably already know a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I did, but no, actually, I feel like I got more out of even tonight, just understanding more what more would be available to us, if we were a nonprofit. No, I appreciate your time.
That's all good info. And
I mean, even things like, we have a lot of decisions like, should we buy the building? Well, if we do that so that, we now own it, don't have to pay for it or whatever rent, there's a lot of maintenance costs. Boiler just needed to be replaced and it was a lot of money. So, there are some things, if you're not prepared to take on those expenses with a planned income coming in, then, we would be in trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with that, I will say one of the interesting things about the organization I worked for in Oregon, it was an old school, very similar story. School turned into community arts center. The Parks and Rec department owned the building. The nonprofit operated out of the building. It was a little confusing sometimes, but not all the time. And that worked so well. It was a huge gift to the nonprofit because we ran everything that happened in that building was entirely the nonprofit. The Parks and Rec just owned the bricks and mortar, but they took on a lot of the overhead expenses and they took on the maintenance of the building and things like that. And that was incredible. So if that could be an option, if there are creative thinkers within your community or the city or whomever you guys are connected to come up with that type of plan where you're the nonprofit that lives and breathes in the building, but something else owns all the other pieces to it. That's the dream, in my opinion. We don't have that option in April. I wish we did. But yeah.
April doesn't just have extra money floating around.
No, unfortunately, not so much.
I think the direction that, I've talked to lots of folks about which direction we should go. And I think a common theme is that in our situation, we'd be looking for a long-term lease with the city, say 20, 40, or 50 years. With right now, our agreement, the city pays our utilities and does our maintenance. And perhaps this organization, which we're part of now, which would probably still exist, would be concerned with the infrastructure and capital costs that can come from the Cultural Facilities Fund and other things. And there'd be some sort of bridge into the programming and, and where the city ends and the nonprofit begins. But yeah, the nonprofit would run the building and the city would maintain an ownership and asset maintenance stake, especially because they have a built-in maintenance crew. So between their crew and private contractors. So if we have emergency situations and everything from every day, there's a guy that goes in our building at 7:30 in the morning and walks around and checks the entire thing and walks out 15 minutes later. That guy, like we don't have to hire that guy. You know what I mean? He's there. He shows up in his truck. So that's the vision is for, I believe, for like a long-term lease, because we don't, we don't have the funding for heavy operations, nor do we have the funding to buy the entire place right now. And I think that by bridging a nonprofit and the government entity gives us the ability to leverage multiple lines of revenue.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. So and if you guys do, some element of a fundraising campaign, we've like I said, we've been just, doing the fundraising side for this amount of time, and then development and then opening, but worked into our capital campaign operating reserves. And I would highly encourage you to do that as well, because you have to, it's a hard thing to fundraise for, but you can allocate certain funds to different things depending on where they come from, to be able to have a reserve for operations. And some funders will really appreciate that, because they'll see that you guys are looking ahead and you want to be able to continue things successfully and long term. And so we've had some family foundations that have really, that's been key for them, that we are working, with. We understand we're not coming, opening day one with, all the revenue ready to go. We need a bucket for that. So if you can figure out a way to do that, grants won't fund it, but family foundations could, and community dollars.
Cool. All right. Anybody else have any questions or anything? I mean, we totally appreciate you coming to talk to us. I'm sorry that we had a couple people calling sick.
Yeah.
But, such is life, and we move on.
Absolutely. And doors wide open. So we believe that, we've gone through a lot of work to get to where we're at, just like you guys have. So if we can help anyone to not have to go through as much work by sharing, then we would love to do that. So never hesitate to reach out, please.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right.
Absolutely. Have a good evening, all.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you.
I'll follow up with you in the coming days for sure.
Sounds good.
And I want you to come down and see our place when we're open for our next show. All right. She's gone.
She lost.
Picked off the thing. So we've got that. There's a bunch of other stuff on here. I'm pretty much the big event of the night was to listen to Aaron. And since we don't have really enough members on board, I'm going to make a motion to skip the rest of the agenda and postpone it to next month.
I'll second.
Sounds
You guys
like
good
a
with that?
plan.
All right,
Yeah.
let's all raise our hands like we're voting.
Thanks,
Bye.
Chris,
All right,
for organizing that. I
Thank
thought
you.
it was,
She's
I thought it was
great.
great.
Thanks for chiming in.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll see you soon,
Thanks.
both of you.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys.